Hello, everybody. My name is Gillian. I'm one of the co-founders in Neuro Pride Ireland. And we're here just to talk about World Book Day. And you might be wondering why Neuro Pride is talking about World Book Day. It's because we're all bookworms and we've bonded over books. We've talked about books. We run a monthly book club where we all get together and talk about all the books we're reading or want to read or have read or possibly could read or are definitely going to get to, and they're not going to sit there for another 6 years. Definitely going to get to them.
Awareness Day. Keep that in mind.
So what we're going to do is talk about what World Book Day means to us as neurodivergent people and the importance of representation in books. And yeah, so that's basically what we're going to do. So yeah, Cír, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm very excited for World Book Day. It's always a big thing for me. Both of us have children. Both me and Gillian both have children, and while World Book Day, the aim is to promote reading in children. I think we also would like to discuss some adult books as well. But do you remember, Gillian, the first time you read a book that had positive neurodivergent representation?
I think I was in adulthood. Looking back, I've read books that had autistic coded characters without it being explicitly stated. I remember really loving Anne of Green Gables, for example. And now looking back at her, I'm like, oh my goodness, that child was so autistic. And actually, I watched the TV program Anne with an E, and the scene where she didn't know what to do because she'd been told not to talk to Gilbert and blah, and and then ended up hitting him in the face and blah. And I actually found it excruciating because it was my childhood. It was me in social situations in school. I just found the first few episodes of that where she's messing up and getting things wrong and completely messing up socially, really quite difficult to sit through because I was like, oh my goodness, that's me. So I suppose that would be, and I now know, looking back, say, Little Women and Joe from Little Women, the Famous Five, George from the Famous Five, there's all these characters that weren't explicitly said because obviously it wasn't a thing. But looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, they very definitely would have been, I would have been drawn to those kind of characters. But I think when adulthood was the first time I read a book where it was explicitly stated this person is autistic or ADHD or blah blah blah. So yeah, and that would have been when I was already kind of examining neurodivergence for myself. So it would have been, I would have read a lot of anthologies of autistic and otherwise neurodivergent adults talking about their experiences and talking about their lives and it was very affirming. It was a very affirming thing to be like, oh, you're not a broken person. All these other people have had similar experiences. So, but I was in my late 30s when that happened. So, and that's far too late to find out that you're part of a community. So yeah, I suppose that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about, the importance of representation at a younger age, not having to wait until you're, much older to find out that, yes, these things exist. And that idea of autistic coding, because we see it a lot. We see a lot of TV programs and stuff having characters that are neurodivergent coded, but not explicitly said. And then maybe a few years later, the makers might be like, oh yeah, we meant them to be. It's like, just say it. If you meant them to be, just say it. Stop using these characters and these quirky characters, and just come out and say it. And when I'm talking about the positive representations, I'm not talking about the ones where people take the negative stereotypes about us, and it's all about that. So not every story that has ADHDers in it has to have them either selling their drugs, somebody else taking their drugs being used for neurotypical people to learn to study better. That's been done to death, and it doesn't really happen that often. So can we just leave it? Because what's happening there, that has a real world consequence in people believing that people with ADHD are selling meds and only getting meds to do, and it's not. You know what I mean? And it results in a gatekeeping around medication, and it results in a lot of stigma for people who do have to take medication. So, you know, for me, that's why positive and proper representation is important to combat some of the stigma and the myths that are out there as well. Because not every autistic person is a white, cishet, middle-class boy who likes maths. I'm dyscalculate. I have no head for maths at all. I'm still as autistic as anybody else. So, yeah. And we're not all good at coding. And as Cír will attest, I'm really bad at technology. Like, to the point where I think I've broken things in ways even the people who made it couldn't figure out how I've managed it. So, yeah, it's just, that's why a wider representation is also important for me. Yeah.
It is. And I would include I want to see more stories where our neurodivergency is not the plot point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want the autistic pirates. I want the BPD. I want the BPD coders. We can code too. But I want these stories where we, like, the characters are neurodivergent, but that's not the whole story. And while, don't get me wrong, those stories are important. It's important that we talk about, like, how people found out they were neurodivergent, or the stigma they face, or any of that stuff. They are important stories for us to have, but I also would love to just
yeah. And can we stop with the my sibling has stories? Can we stop with that? And I'm so good, and I'm so brave, and my sibling uses a wheelchair, my sibling is autistic, my sibling has Down syndrome, my sibling. No, that's just, please give it a rest, because it's really othering.
It is.
So, yeah.
We at Neuro Pride, we have a lovely resource, which is a list of books that are neuroaffirmative. But in developing that list, we had to sift through a lot of non-neuroaffirmative books, and it is so tiring reading the I have epilepsy, but my family still love me stories, or, you know, this
change the buts to an and.
Yes,
I have epilepsy and my family love me.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. Then I am this, or I have this, but so despite this terrible burden I am to everybody, they still love me. Like, what is that saying? I have green eyes, but my family still love me. I have blonde hair, but my family still love me. That's how nonsensical it sounds to us. That's how ridiculous it is. We are not lovable despite our disabilities. We are lovable. That's it. You can finish the sentence there. Yeah. And it might seem, that's the thing, it might seem that those books are positive, and a lot of times they are, until you get to the but. There's no need for a but. There's no need to say, well, I have this terrible thing and this awful thing about me, but you know, if you can just overlook that, I'm actually all right. That's not a good message. That's not a positive message, despite how colourful and beautiful your drawings are to go with it. And it's just important to kind of remind yourself of that put anything else in there and see if the tone would say the same.
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't accept, well, most of us wouldn't accept anymore. I'm black, but my family still love me. I'm gay, but my family still love me. It's the but that's the problem.
Yeah,
you know,
it is.
If that makes sense.
It is. And
we don't like big butts and we cannot lie. That's all I'm saying. I'm
sorry. I think I was lucky in a sense that my first, like that I can recall my first experience of reading about neurodivergent character was when I was a teen, with the Percy Jackson books. Because Rick Riordan is brilliant at the old ADHD representation. But so I was lucky in that sense, and I'm not ADHD. No, I'm not a whole bloody diagnosis. I'm not an ADHDer. I apologize. But when I was reading it, it was like, oh my God, yes. And just obviously I couldn't relate to the whole experience, but like the othering that the characters received in mainstream education because their teachers were telling them that they were lazy and they were troublemakers and all this, I related to that side of it. And I was just like, oh my God, yeah, you go Percy. And you're this type of way. And like then other characters like Annabeth being dyslexic, but being extremely freaking clever. And we know that. But unfortunately, a lot of what we get told as neurodivergent people as children are you can't be that clever if you X, Y, Z, or worse, in my opinion, you're not living up to your potential.
I was just going to say, could do better if you just applied yourself, if you just tried harder. Do you know how hard that is to hear when you're trying your absolute best? That you are trying so hard, and then the adults around you are telling you that you're not trying hard enough. It's soul destroying. It's soul destroying to be told that. And I'm really thankful that, and you'll probably see from our Neuro Pride list, I am so thankful that there are so many books available to my children now to combat that, and to give them access to other people who think like them, and other people who talk like them, and other people who communicate like them. My eldest child, for example, that's how they process stuff. So if they're struggling with something, they read a book about it, and then we talk about it, and they're able to go, oh, this is an experience that other people have had. I'm not. And they still struggle with it. They still struggle with being different and stuff like that. They are very aware that they have different experiences to a lot of their peers. But being able to hand them a book or to read something together and be like, so this is it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and a lot of times, like, I can give them the theory. I can give them the, blah, 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 but that's alexithymia and this is why. And, oh, that's rejection sensitivity. Oh, that's blah, blah. Know a lot of the theory and a lot of the background. But that's not necessarily accessible to an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old or 10-year-old. They don't want to actually have a lecture. Strangely enough.
They're not interested in all your research papers and all.
Yeah, just not that interested in my footnotes and my slide presentation. But after reading a book, and then they might be a bit more open to the explanation behind it. Do you know that kind of way?
Yeah.
and being able to relate it to their own experiences. So yeah, and as Cír said, there are more books coming out where the characters are neurodivergent, but it's not the whole plot. Like I'm thinking of Chris Bonello's books there, that it's a dystopian fantasy series. Now it's a little bit too old for my kid right now, but it'll be definitely something I'll probably look at later. But most of the characters are neurodivergent, but that's just by the by. It obviously influences their experiences in the book or whatever, but the story is around the dystopian, futuristic, end of the worldy kind of stuff. That's what and it's actually the fact that these kids are neurodivergent is actually a strength and stuff like that, because not that I'm doing superpowers or anything like that, but do you know what I mean, in terms of being able to combat what's going on. They work together because there are a lot of different neurodivergences, and they work together as a team to kind of figure out what to do. So do you know what I mean? So like the ADHDers might have 5 billion ideas, and the autistic person goes, no, that's not going to work. Do you know, that kind of way? Bit like Neuro Pride, where that's exactly how we work. Let's do all these 70 million things. No, I'm going to have to stop you there. So I think that's that kind of idea of characters and books with characters who are neurodivergent, but it's not the whole thing, is starting to happen, is starting to become a genre in its own in a lot of ways. Like Rosie Jones wrote a children's book, with a character who has cerebral palsy. But like that, it's about that character's life. It's not about necessarily only just about cerebral palsy and what it means and here's what I do. And it's really funny because obviously she's a comedian. It's funny, it's accessible, it's a fun book. That's the thing. Having books that are actually fun to read and enjoyable to read seems to be a novel concept when it comes to neurodivergent, but it's actually happening. And it's actually happening through own voice authors who are neurodivergent themselves. And that's really important as well, because we don't live in doom and gloom all the time, despite what the majority would have you believe. Our community is quite vibrant and funny and engaging, and like our games nights are only meant to run for an hour, and generally will run for hours and hours and hours, where we play games and joke and laugh and mess around. The book club, again, meant to be for an hour. It's never just an hour. We'll waffle on for hours there. And this is a little secret, sometimes after the book club is over, myself and Ciara will have an extra book club after dark, where we continue talking about books. So that's an important part of when we say neuroaffirming books. For me, that's a really important part as well, that they're fun books to read, they're enjoyable books to read, they're for anybody. That's the thing. It's not, well, you're neurodivergent, so you're only allowed to read these neurodivergent books. These books are fun for everybody. They're good, well-written books for anybody to read. And that for me is also another important facet of this.
It is.
That there's no good just saying, well, you're only allowed to read these books and nobody else, because how are you going to get an insight? How are you going to understand that? How are you going to break down that stigma? Because that stigma still very much exists. So I'm going to use the word groundbreaking. They're groundbreaking books in a lot of ways for that. Because let's be honest, in terms of acceptance and we're still in our infancy. It's still very much a work in progress.
Yeah.
People might like to use buzzwords, and there might be all sorts of awareness days and all this kind of nonsense. But on the ground, we're still very much in our infancy of breaking down that stigma. And for me, books are a really important way of doing that. So, yeah.
I would agree. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I'm a fiend for YA. I love a young adult book, and I the majority of the ones I read now would include neurodivergent characters. not as the story plot, but just as they are neurodivergent and this story is X, Y, and Z. Generally speaking, I'm not gonna lie, the story generally is about them being in love or being queer, because apparently I just want all of the representation. And yes, I like, obviously I do want at some stage like those queer characters to just be queer characters without their story being the story, but like it's still important. So like when I think of like Heartstoppers was huge on Netflix last year, absolutely. But Alice Osman, her books are incredible, and Heartstoppers has some great depression representation, which is often highly problematic in books and stuff like this, but it was represented so well. And even in terms of they like, it didn't feel like a burden on their friends and stuff, because often a lot of stories around mental health in general would be you are burdensome. And I know we have that in neurodivergency and disabled stories in general, but I feel like there's slightly different edge to it when it comes to the mental health side of stuff, because like it's like, well, you should be okay, like it's all just in your head, you know, this type of way, and therefore any problems are self-created, you know, this type of way. That is not the way it is. I'm saying the way books tend to put this forward. And Alice Osman has a great way of explaining these this depression, and also how it can affect family members and friends and everything without it feeling like they would be better off without the depressed person, which is the vibe I get a lot of times whenever there is a depressed
it's a bit like the old Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh situation, that their friends just accept that this is going on for them. And you know, if you ever want to know how to help how to be around the rest person, you could do worse than looking at Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh and how his friends treat him and just turn up and like just accept him. And sorry, you went from young adult queer love stories to I went to Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh.
So, no, that's fair. That's okay.
We've both got our teams. So yeah.
If it's okay with you, I do have like a little pile of books here that I did just want to highlight. Obviously there's so many good books out there. Me and Gillian could literally spend hours telling you about all the amazing books, and there is the Neuro Pride list that will go into description and will go everywhere, that is constantly being updated. Anytime we read a book and we're like, oh, this is neuroaffirmative, it gets added to the list. And it ranges from ridiculously like baby age books all the way up to anybody, you know, this type of way. And there's a good variety of fiction, non-fiction, I think is fair to say. But just Migraine and Mia, while yes, this is going to be one of these stories that is informing us of things, I will say I've never met a migraine book that informs you of things so well. And it's fun and it's funny. My child was laughing reading it with me, despite knowing how much pain my headaches can cause me. Like just something like doctors call it an aura, some call it art, I call it gross. And it's like, yeah, that's how I feel when I get an aura as well, you know, this type of way. And it's just, I like that we're having more of these stories that explore. It's not just like, oh, my sister has migraines and she spends all day in bed and all those stories. This is funny, very beautiful book showing us. I have migraines, and this is about child with migraines, but I have migraines. And honestly, anybody who tells me a migraine is just a headache is getting handed this book from now on.
Handed is very polite of you. Hit
I
around the
know,
head
right?
with it.
Wired differently. If you can
Mm.
only pick up one neurodivergent book for tweens and teens in your life, I think I would say this one.
Wow. Considering how
Because
many you've read, that's high praise indeed.
it is. What I love about it is it highlights 30 different people.
Mm.
And I think this is why I love it so much, because it's highlighting 30 different people. We then get to talk about loads of different neurodivergencies, because unfortunately we are very, like, when people talk about neurodivergencies, I think we can agree that it tends to be very ADHD and autistic heavy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know we're guilty of that as well. There just is so much more research and resources and everything available. And that's one of the things I love about this book. Like, we have a dyspraxic DJ in it. We have a dyspraxic race driver, dyslexic video journalist, this type of way.
That's exactly it. And it's hard because the research that is out there about dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, and stuff like that, the reason that Neuro Pride doesn't share it is because it is really, really ableist.
Yeah.
It's really ableist and not neuroaffirming. And it'd be more harmful for us to share a lot of the stuff than not. Do you know what I mean? I'm dyspraxic, and I've read a lot of the stuff, and it's just like, I can't put this out into the ether. I can't. Do you know what I mean? And for some of it, well, this bit's okay, but this bit really, really isn't. Yeah. So by sharing this little bit, so yeah, like it's one of the things, like, but I don't think people realize that how prevalent the likes of dyspraxia is, and dyscalculia. But dyspraxia is as prevalent. They say 1 in 26 or something like that. So every classroom, across the country could have a dyspraxic student, or probably does have a dyspraxic student, and yet the diagnostic rates are really, really low, comparatively speaking, because it isn't researched and it isn't looked into. So it would be great to share better resources, and it would be great if people were producing better resources. But at the moment, like, the only reason that, for example, autistic research has got better is because a lot more is being done by autistic researchers.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of getting through for ADHD and stuff like that. But for an awful lot of the rest, it's not. The research is not being done by people who have that particular neurodivergence or that neurodivergence. And it shows, it very much shows. So it's very unfortunate. If people have good resources, please fire them into us, because we would absolutely love them. But yeah, it's very difficult and it's not helped by companies and service providers using neurodiversity as a synonym for autism and sometimes ADHD. That's not what that means, and they're not the same thing.
Yep.
Neurodiversity is like biodiversity. It means all brains. So saying we're neurodiversity friendly, it's like, so you're friendly to all people. Hopefully that's the truth, but I don't know why anybody should care. Or having neurodiversity of, like, blah, blah, blah. It's like, one person can't be neurodiverse, just so you know. They can be neurodivergent, but they can't be neurodiverse, because so, like, and that's a problem that we all have to kind of, like, it might seem like very pedantic to be addressing this, but this is why. It's because if we don't address it, then all of a sudden people who have BPD, people who have OCD, people who have Tourette's, people who have cerebral palsy, people who have depression, people who have anxiety, all of these people who are covered under the neurodiversity paradigm, who are people with acquired brain injury, people who could have access and should have access to the community, don't feel like they're part of the community because neurodiversity and constantly using neurodiversity to try and frame it as sunshine, lollipops and rainbows. It's like, that's not our lived reality. And you're actually doing us an enormous disservice. There's an awful lot of neurodivergence that is not that is an impairment. And by trying to spin it into a positive thing and using it as, your professional development days or whatever you're doing it with, you're not actually acknowledging the lived experience of our community. So that's why own voice books and books that actually understand the neurodiversity paradigm and what's involved and who it covers are so important. So yeah, I'm glad that, because Joe Wells, who wrote it, is autistic, so he could have just been like, right, I'll just do autistic people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he didn't. And actually, he's pretty damn funny as well as a comedian. He's really funny. So if you follow his Facebook page, he's really funny. And he shows how to laugh and joke about these things without punching down, which is also very important. So
own voices are so important, and where possible, most of Neuro Pride's recommendations are own voices books. Not always possible, because not always those books out there from people, which is it's obviously not great. But I understand, like, there's so many barriers to being published and to writing and all this jazz. So, but where possible, we will share own voices, but that's not always possible. Like when BPD, I have read so many books about BPD at this stage since being diagnosed. They're majority of them are very upsetting, to be perfectly honest with you. And like, it's really disheartening when you're first diagnosed with BPD and doing a Google search of BPD books, and the first books that are recommended is like how to survive a parent with BPD, how to take care of somebody with BPD and love them anyway, and just basically how awful we can be and how we harm everybody around us. I do not believe that. That's what the literature kept telling me. Cluster B diagnoses have awful stigma attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
And while this is not an own voice, Millie the Cat is a kid's book, and it describes BPD in the most neuroaffirmative way I have ever encountered people describing BPD. And it talks about, like, obviously, like, sadness can take over and all this, but also, like, oh my God, intense emotions of happiness and joy and all this stuff that make, like, the things I love about my BPD, that like creativity, that flair, all that jazz, this type of way. And that's a good, like, if anybody does know any really good own voice books on BPD, I want it, I love it. But we don't always have an option of own voices as much as we want. But we do prioritize them in Neuro Pride, right? But yeah, I think the important thing for us is we want children and adults, but as World Book Day is focused on children, we want children to see positive representation of themselves and stories. And that's why we created the Neuro Pride book recommendation list. That's why we sent it to every library in Ireland last year. And we were so happy that so many of the libraries got on board and put out tables full of neuro books, and some libraries shared our list on their Facebooks and stuff like that, and it was really positive. That's why we had for our during Neuro Pride, we came up with the idea of having a kids' day of Neuro Pride as well, and we done a storytelling at that, and read lovely bunny buttons. And a lovely story Gillian wrote as well about a grey balloon. And we are aiming to share the list with as many schools as possible this year, with the hopes that schools will allocate some of their money towards funding neuroaffirmative books into their school libraries, because all children deserve to have positive representation of themselves in the books, not on, and like the way a lot of people sell these type of things is the children will learn to accept each other. And yes, obviously we want children to learn to accept each other, but I don't know about you, Gillian, but for me, it's more important that any child that feels othered can see themselves and be like, yes, this, and we're going to continue to read all the books and promote as much books as we can. And I think we look forward to, there's been such an uptick in the amount of books published, like self-published books and everything, this type of way around.
I have a little stack of, I haven't even got them yet, but I have a little stack of books. There's so many good books. Like Cír and myself are reading I Will Die on This Hill, which is a great book from two parents, one who was autistic and one who is a parent of an autistic child. And it's very interesting because they started out absolutely hating each other, like commenting on each other's Facebook pages, giving out stink to each other and all this kind of stuff, blocking each other and all this. And it's about how they kind of realized, hang on a second, this isn't helping our children. This isn't helping the autistic community or the neurodivergent community. We need to learn how to bridge this gap. So it's about that idea of they were both on separate hills, and now how they work together. And they have a lot of own voice advocates doing chapters and everything. So it's quite neuroaffirming. But as I said, I'm only like 4 or 5 chapters in. But like that's that kind of a book is very, there's a lot of them coming out. There's a lot of people coming out writing. Like Fern Brady has a book out. There's another man called Peter Warmbury. There's a lot of people writing about their own experiences, their own life stories, and their own kind of experiences, but like that in a funny, accessible, open to anybody kind of way. Not just like, you will only be interested in this if you think that you possibly could be neurodivergent. So yeah, like there's a lot, as you said, Cír, there's a lot of books coming up, and a lot more sort of teenage books as well coming out, and kind of, so yes, we will try and keep on top of it.
Like this came out late last year, and Gillian has heard me rant about it so many times because I love it so much. But Speak Up by Rebecca Burgess. This book had an intention when I bought it, is no longer being that intention, is getting passed around to as many autistic tweens and teens as I can possibly do, because it's autistic character, and they're part of their story is like them being autistic and all this jazz, but then the other part of their story is like music and love of music and all this jazz, and it's just so beautiful. It's so funny. I read it in a few hours and I cried and I laughed, and It is, and I've never seen such an accurate manifestation, drawing of
Drawing.
um sensory overwhelmness, and then the joy of when you get to escape that sensory overwhelmness. Like they're like in their school clothes and it's like and then like they come home and they're getting out of their school clothes and then they're in their trousers rolled up, no socks, and a baggy jumper, and it's like, oh my god, yes, this is my life. And it's just, but this is what I mean, like there's so many books. I have a huge list of books that I want to read. Like obviously just a list of books in general I want to read, but also a list of neurodivergent books that I want to review. That's probably more accurate. And that makes me so happy that we do have so many.
Do you remember when, you know, there was one or two books like that, and like even 5 years ago, there was not the amount of books. Like there just wasn't there. The representation wasn't there. And it's great. It's fantastic that there's so many books to review. It's fantastic that there's options, and they're good options. It's not, oh, this is the best of a bad lot. It's a little bit problematic, but it's not as bad as all those rest of them. So okay. They're good options. They're interesting, fun, and good options especially for kids. Like there's just really good books now. Do you know what I mean?
Still room for improvement.
Still room for improvement, but there are more. There's still, that book list could be a lot longer. Do you know what I mean? It could be a lot longer.
Especially with it. Once again, it is very ADHD and autistic heavy.
Yeah.
I would I really struggle to find good neuroaffirmative books with people with Down syndrome. I found two. One is lovely, You Are Enough, but once again, it's not an own voice. It's inspired by a child with Down syndrome, but it is still a lovely book, and the information is great in it. There is a lot of books that are aimed towards adults, but yes, and then there's like things like that. There's there is a lot of neurodivergencies out there that they don't have a lot.
You know what I'd like to see a bit more represented?
What?
Autistic or neurodivergent joy.
Yeah. Because
we do this every so often in Neuro Pride, that we do lightning talks, or which are short little talks where somebody talks about their interest and then people can ask them questions, whatever. Or we'll do a thread on autistic joy, or we'll share something like that. I really like perpetual motion things for stim, like just watching things like that, like visual stims, or we'll share something that, you know, and everybody jumping in and be like, oh yeah, I love this, and sharing stuff. And there's not enough focus on the amount of joy, the pleasure that we can get from what other people will think were relatively simple things. Like, do you know what I mean? And it'd be nice to have some books that celebrated it. Not in a patronizing way, but actually just talking about the things. We call them, in the community, we call them glimmers. So you have triggers and things that cause you distress, sensory or emotional distress. But glimmers are things that cause you sensory joy, that actually you get. Like, for me, a lot of it would be things in nature, like, so sitting in a wood, watching the light dapple through the trees. Something really, really simple, but something that brings me a lot of joy. Or sitting on a beach and listening to the waves. An empty beach, I'm not going to lie. I don't want other humans there. I go to beaches to get away from people, not to be anywhere near them. So things like that, sitting on a river with your toes dipped in the water and dabbling. Do you know what I mean? Furry things. I'm a big fan of furry things. I'm cozy, glittery, and
rainbow,
shiny. Those are my things. But this is the thing. Everybody has these things, but we don't see enough of that focused on. Do you know what I mean? We all have struggles. It is not, I'm a fan of useful reality. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are things about being neurodivergent. Like, I have impairments. I am impaired, and the way that society is set up often disables me. But that doesn't negate the other side and the joy. And I don't want to not be neurodivergent. I don't want, because if you take the hard things, then you also take the really good things. And I don't want that. And that's important for me, for children to know that everybody, you're a full and complete human being with nuances like any other human being. And all of it is important. And all of it is part of you and what makes you you. So, yeah. There you go. Sorry. That was me just going off on a waffle. But yeah.
Grant. That's you just adding to my ever-growing list of, oh, I want to write that. Not my work in progress books list is about as long as my want to read list at this stage.
That's exactly it. So
Do you have any final words you want to say?
No, I think just happy World Book Day. I hope that we've explained why we thought it was an important day. March is chock-a-block full of awareness days and acceptance days and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like there's no other dates in the world. But yeah, this one is just, I suppose, because we're both such bookworms, it has a little extra thing for us. But yeah, just happy World Book Day.
Thank you. And I will say that also, but I am going to add in, there is, as we say, there is a big pile of amazing books out there. We do have a list, but our list is not complete. We are constantly updating, and if you have any book recommendations, do throw them our way. World Book Day's website has free audiobooks. Your library is an amazing resource. Most libraries now, all of the libraries now in Ireland, both north and south, are connected to BorrowBox. Some are also connected to Libby, which are both apps that you can use to read ebooks and listen to audiobooks for free. YouTube has great resources of like literally one of the books that I was looking at there, actually it's Wiggle, Stomps and Squeezes, has the author reading it. Most books, children's books, you could put in the name of it, read out loud, and you will find it.
Yeah.
I know money can prevent people from buying books, and like totally fair, but there are free ways of accessing these. So whether you're neurodivergent or you have neurodivergent children in your life, please give them the gift of being able to access books with neuroaffirmative characters.
Yep. And just to say, in terms of the library, you can go to a library and say, here's a list of books, could you get them in? And they will. Also, I know most people are probably aware of this, but you can order a book from any library in Ireland and get it delivered to your local library. And I happen to know that my local library, because I may have nagged them, has a lot of these books. I have a friend who's a librarian who I just keep on sending the list to. Here's the updated list. Here's the updated list. So yeah, so if your local library doesn't have them, you can probably get them from another library in Ireland. And if they don't have them, you can request that they get them. The libraries update their catalogue quite a bit. And if there's, and if there's people going in saying from enough places, they will get them. They will get them in. Librarians are librarians because they're really into books as well. So, if they find somebody going, here, will you get these books? They'll probably mostly be delighted to help you out. So, yeah, that's something to bear in mind.
I don't know if librarians of Ireland are going to love us or hate us, considering how much we talk about the libraries.
That's exactly like, stop telling us people about us. But yeah. Also, if you're
Amazing.
looking for a space to hold a meeting or anything like that, that isn't anything to do with money, libraries have rooms. That's all I'm saying. If you need
Yep.
a space to kind of join and gather together, as long as you're not raising money, you can do community meetings and stuff like that there as well. So there you go. This has now turned into an advertisement.
Libraries are amazing.
Libraries are cool. It's one of the few places you are allowed to go where there's no expectation to spend money.
Yeah.
So,
and it's very standard of me and Gillian to end with libraries are amazing. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good World Book Day.